Welcome to episode 24 of the Civil War Breakfast Club. I am your co-host, Mary, and I am joined, as always, by my awesome co-host and the best Civil War nerd that I know, Darren Weeks.
Thank you so much. It feels like just yesterday you called me just Darren. Remember that? You just said you're just Darren. Not good, not bad. You're just Darren. But in any case, thank you, Mary. It's great to have it on. And today's this very special night for a lot of different reasons. We are going to talk about something we've wanted to talk about for a long time, which was the early days of John Wilkes Booth. An interesting topic. We're going to talk about this. And we're not going to talk about the assassination. We're not going to talk about the escape. We're not going to talk about how we lived to get to eat in Oklahoma. We're not going to talk about any of that stuff. We're just going to talk about some of the early days. As much as people were surprised as what happened, the assassination shocked the whole world. Some of the people closest to him were also surprised. So just some of these quotes. Kitty Brink, a wardrobe assistant at Ford's Theater, said he was nothing like the terrible deeds he did suggest. Actor John Matthews said, a most winnable, captivating man. L.J. Ferguson at Ford's Theater said, a marvelous, clever, and amusing demigod. And they were stunned when this happened. So we figured to get to the bottom of what made John Wilkes Booth tick, we would bring in our friend Lisa Samia, who is a award-winning author, and she's someone who's done a lot of speeches on John Wilkes Booth. So we figured we want to talk about Booth, we got to bring Lisa in. So welcome, Lisa. It's a pleasure to have you with us tonight.
Welcome to the Civil War Breakfast Club, Lisa. We're so happy to have you join us tonight to talk about something Darren and I have been interested in for most of our lives, which is John Wilkes Booth, and obviously the assassination, but we are more than interested in just that, just because Booth is a figure who didn't just appear on April the 14th, 1865. There's a story there that I think to understand the assassination, to even understand Abraham Lincoln better, and even the Civil War a little bit more, is to know Booth in his early days. And we are obviously going to also talk about his sister Asia, who he was incredibly close with. So welcome, Lisa, and we're so happy to have you here.
I'm really looking forward to this tonight, and welcome everyone. One of the best ways that we can learn, try to understand John Wilkes Booth, I always think of him like an onion skin, like, the closer you try to, peel away, it's still more and more layers that we can't get to, because he was such a complicated figure. But one way that we do get to know him in his early years, and up until the time his early adulthood, he went off to act, is through his older sister, Asia. Asia was the Booth family chronicler. She was, writer, a poet, and she was incredibly close to her brother, John. She was about 2.5 years older than her brother. She wrote a memoir, but it was a secret memoir of her brother, John. It's called The Unlocked Book. She wrote it in secret because in 1868, she and her husband, John, had left the United States. They moved to England. The assassination was so terrible. And so she wrote it in secret. Her husband, John Sleeper Clark, blamed John for all of his problems. And here it's almost like a light is turned on in the Booth household, and that we get to see him. We have to remember too, that this book is from recollections. This isn't a day-by-day diary account. These are her recollections, her memories. She wrote it in 1874, gave it out of the family, but it wasn't published until 1938. In this book, like I said, we do have a very good picture of John Wilkes from his sister Asia growing up in the Maryland countryside at Tudor Hall. That was the family home built around 1851, 1852 by their father. Unfortunately, he passed away in 1852 and did not live there. But we see a picture of both of them actually growing up in their teens in the Maryland countryside. So it's a very, very important piece that we have to learn about him as a family member and how he was growing up.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, I think a lot of people think of Booth, they think of Edwin, they think of people like that. I don't think a lot of people even heard of Asia. And the ironic thing about Asia is it was without a doubt, realistically, the closest person John had growing up with. You mentioned the fact that his father died when he was relatively young, 1852, kind of a loner a little bit. He was very headstrong, very stubborn. Took him a little while to learn, but when he learned it, it was like a vice in his head. Very opinionated. Asia always seemed to be that rock. It seemed like that was the one bright spot in his life. We talked before about some of the, you want to say he was born under a bad sign. His mother had that premonition about him.
Correct.
He was 6 months old, or that she felt that he was going to just live a very dark life. And as he gets older, he has that experience at school with those gypsies, right? He's told he's going to die young. It's just going to be a very dark life for him. I think he was always felt like he was one step behind. And I think he had this feeling of darkness that seemed to surround him. But Asia was the one light in his life. that seemed to always kind of cast and kind of guide him on that right direction. He kind of went off in the wrong direction, as we'll talk about. But I think people need to realize just, her importance. I mean, she's born 1835. Her life is just as tragic in a lot of ways.
That's what was also, when Booth assassinated the president, he assassinated more than just the president, obviously, who kept the Union together. He assassinated Mary Todd Lincoln's husband, their children's father. He destroyed the best chance of the South for Reconstruction. Okay, we know all of that, right? But what happened to the Booth family? What happened to Asia and the type of life? We'll get into that, I guess, a little bit later. But what type of life, she had, and how tragic her life ended up being as well. Not only just, dying out besides that, but all the tragedy that surrounded her life, unfortunately.
The thing that I picked up from just reading Asia's book is that definitely this closeness, definitely the rock, Darren has referred to her as the anchor as well, but also just that it was kind of like a them against the world sort of thing. It was always them together. Rosalie she gets mentioned occasionally, but you can tell that Rosalie and Asia did not have a very close relationship at all. That's just the impression that I got.
I'm not sure why that was. I think Asia had a strong personality, and I think one thing I did read about Rosalie was that she at one time had a suitor that the father did not approve of. Once that happened, she never attempted another romantic venture. She seems like she probably fell into the quietness of life, and she was very devoted to her mother. That was kind of her role in the family. So you're right. I didn't get that sense of closeness with the two girls.
It was probably the typical sibling relationship where they might have bickered a little bit, whereas John and Asia were definitely very, very close siblings. As the book progresses, they're the ones that really tough winter they had. They're going out to check the animal traps together, and it almost seemed like they were the two that were looking after the family in some respects.
Yeah, and you talk about just some of the problems they had. I mean, certainly they're a famous family, right? You hate to say it, but they're like the 19th century Kardashians in a way. Everyone knew who they all were. They lived in a fishbowl. Every chance that someone took to take a shot at them, they would. Junius Brutus Booth, he was like the modern day Axl Rose on the stage. Sometimes he would just flip out, yell at people, not come on. Suffered through melancholy. His son Joseph had to eventually tour with him to make sure he got there. So you think about the difficultness it must have been growing up. As they get a little bit older, the secret of Junius comes out, which is going to be a devastating thing for that family when Marie Christine Adelaide Delanoy shows up, who had been allegedly was married to Junius 25 years prior. He never divorced her. He comes back and he ends up marrying Marianne Holmes, and she shows up and starts causing all kinds of problems with the family. Right when John Wilkes is 9 years old, this is all hitting a celebrity family all at one time at that age.
Correct. So what happened was in about late 1846, early 1847, the appearance of Adelaide Delaney Booth in Baltimore. Booths also had a Baltimore City residence along with Tudor Hall. They purchased that in 1845. They had a son. Junius and Adelaide had a son, Richard. He told his mother, he says, he has another family. There were 10 children, 6 of which survived to adulthood. And so she comes and she's like, excuse me, we are married. And that was an unbelievable event. She just leapt at Marianne. And from what I understand, one of the things that came out, and it was a quote, I believe, from the Baltimore American, that when Adelaide saw Marianne she would go to sell her vegetables from the farm. She would be in the stall, and Adelaide would just attack her, call her all of these terrible names. This was a very, very public and humiliating thing for Mrs. Booth to go through. But it also said that she would also call whatever child was with her a bastard. So just do the math in our heads a little bit. What child or children would have been with Marianne? Would she have taken Rosalie or Asia? Would she have taken the girls? More than likely, it would have been either John and or Joseph, his younger brother.
Mary, you want to handle this math question, by the way? You want to jump in on this one? She's not good at math, so you can't say the M word.
I can't imagine though how it definitely, I think definitely John or Joseph, but for John, he being 9 years old at the time, to hear that what that would have done to a kid.
I think this is again my opinion. What I've read from history is that John's older sister Rosalie, when John was 20, told him what that was all about. I just question that because again, we're talking a celebrity family, right? Let's go back to that. I don't really know a lot of the, big Hollywood acting, people or whatever, but like a superstar family, he was exposed to that. How did that affect him in a subliminal way in his attitudes towards women, in his attitudes towards men? Again, Darren and Mare, the incident at Tudor Hall when he was, I think, probably 14 years old, 15. They had an overseer. He was overworking the animals. I guess Mrs. Booth said something at the time, and this man, this George Hagen, was furious, ignored her, whatever, and called her, some kind of name. And then when John heard of it, he went after the fellow and he clubbed him, I guess, with a cudgel or something. You have to think, and I think, where is that coming from? Okay, there was no ladies at Tudor Hall. It was an insult, but his reaction was so intense. And then let's look at his attitude towards women. Again, if we went through all the girlfriends and everything, that would be for a whole other lecture.
Exactly.
That playboy mentality, and the overprotectiveness of his sister Asia and his mother and his other sister, especially when Asia was getting ready to be married. And what John said to Asia prior to her wedding: just remember that your name is dower enough for anyone. Remember, you could be a professional stepping stone. He's telling his sister, this guy is NG. This guy, he's just in it to win it. He's in it because of the Booth name. Later on, John Sleeper Clark, Asia's husband, and Edwin are partners in the theater and managers. So it did pay off to marry a Booth now, didn't it? Right? Didn't it?
Yeah, I think he had that whole "no one's good enough to marry my sister" thing. There was
agree.
that too. I think the whole thing that ran into his mud with Marianne and with Adelaide at the market there, I think it gave him a protection of females in his family that he'd stuck with. It almost became like his core, right? So when you see these stories of the kids growing up and they're running around playing in the snow at Tudor Hall, the incident with George Hagen that you mentioned, he's this plowshare guy and he's yelling at the slaves and causing all these problems, and John grabs Dr. Feelgood and has over there and puts it upside his head.
Yeah.
He does that because he insulted the women, right? To what you said a minute ago, he goes, you better come apologize to the ladies at the house. And he goes, there are no ladies at that house. And that's what set John off, and then whack, right? I think all the things that happened with him growing up, I think he had his mother. He was clearly a mother's boy. He didn't want to go fight in the war, right?
He was a favorite. Yep, absolutely.
Between Marianne and Asia, they were the two things in his life that proved that all the prophecies that he felt about himself, that he had this goodness in his life in them too. And he was going to protect them any way he possibly could. And that was the one constant all the way through, all the way through his life and right up to the very end for him. And so, you mentioned before with the girlfriends and things like that. When he's writing that Valentine's Day to Lucy Hale, right? And he's up all night long struggling to write.
And that's February 14th, 1865.
Right. Just a couple months before. And he's sitting with Asia trying to write these words out. And he's nervous and he's trying to write the words. It seems that whenever he needed someone to go to, it was Asia. He didn't always say why he needed her help, but the fact that she was there always seemed to be a strength to him and gave him strength. I think when he was at that point, obviously he was going down a very dark road mentally. There's no doubt. What was going on in the war, what was going on in his own mind. He was drinking, he was hitting life pretty good as a celebrity. But I think he always fell back to them, especially Asia, is something to grab onto when he was sinking. That would be his constant.
Mm-hmm. Well, we do know that when Asia married John Sleeper Clark in April of 1859, John came up from Richmond because from 1858 to 1860, remember, he was in Richmond at the Richmond Theater. He was, stock player actor, and he traveled up after they made their home in Philadelphia. John would stop. He would visit her when his travels allowed. He would stop at her home. He was welcome there because we also have to remember after John left Tudor Hall, it must have been sometime in early 1857 because 1857, his future brother-in-law, John Sleeper Clark, got him his first gig at the Arch Street Theater in Philadelphia. After that, after he left Tudor Hall, he had no home. He would visit Sister Asia. He would see Edwin and, Mary Devlin his wife, when they lived in Dorchester, Massachusetts for a short time. And then when they moved to New York, but think about it, they really had no home. So, she was an anchor, definitely. She was very important, I think, in his life as a support. All of these things that he had going for him, he still went down that terrible path.
Reputation was big for John. Like you mentioned before, he was always living in the shadow of Edwin, his older brother, who was more famous, living up to the father, whatever daddy issues he had from the father. There's always that. He always felt he was being looked down upon for being the other Booth, right? But I think he spilled a little of that on a John Sleeper Clark as well, because Booth, he's doing King Richard, he's doing Pescara, he's doing all these Shakespearean roles, and then he sees this guy marrying his sister, who really was the Jim Carrey of his day, able to project a little bit of what he felt about Edwin onto John Sleeper. I think that was a big part of why he didn't like him.
I think that was a huge thing. And I think Asia, in her book, she remarks about when they performed Julius Caesar together, how Edwin was intimidated or seemed intimidated by John.
Edwin was, and a little bit about the acting. I know there's been, some authors who state that, John hated Edwin. I'm sure, and like we're discussing right now, there are levels of sibling rivalry. We just talked about, Asia and Rosalie. When Edwin got married in 1860, John was the only Booth at the wedding, and he turned and he hugged his brother and he kissed him. When Mary Devlin Booth, when she died, I believe in February of 1863 in Dorchester, Massachusetts, John came up to be with his brother. Now, again, I know there's different levels. People said the course was set. I look at, a family member who was at a wedding, and that's a beautiful time for a family member. That's the best of times. So he was there for the best of time, and then he was there for the worst of time. Well, they were rivals. Yeah, Edwin voted for Lincoln, and Booth, as we know from day one, hated Lincoln.
Edwin, he was someone who I think challenged himself more as an actor, because he performed more in the North, where the name wasn't as famous. Whereas John loved Richmond because everyone knew who he was. He was in front of the home crowd. You mentioned he went to boarding school with Fitzhugh Lee, with a lot of those Southern planter those rich kids. And you can see how all the time he spent in the South, he really felt, you could picture him getting on stage in Richmond. The crowd is cheering, yelling for his name. Back then when you went to a theater, it wasn't like you just sat there and watched. You participated. They were yelling back and forth, and you could see that he was on top of the world there. So he really fell in love with the South. And so as the Civil War began and continued, he took a personal ownership. And as he saw Edwin more towards the North, like most of the Booth family was, I think whatever divide they had was exacerbated, because I think he saw every flaw between him and Edwin, and he put the politics into it and used the politics as a wedge. And I think that was probably the biggest thing. I think by the end, when he saw Edwin, he almost saw Lincoln. He saw somebody with his name representing antithesis of everything he believed in. I think that was a big part of the issue with Edwin going forward too. Besides just the sibling stuff, I think that's not always going to be there.
Yeah,
their style was so different. It just was. As you know, John Wilkes Booth was known for his swashbuckling and his sword fights, very, very intense. And it was said that, when he would finish a play, he would just lay like this in the back, and, like he couldn't get up for 10 or 15 minutes because he left it all on the stage. But he was very, very physical. He spent a lot of time honing his body, and in today's vernacular, we probably call him a gym rat, right? But, it paid off. It was like he was quick as a cat on his feet, marbling the audiences. And Edwin, I don't really hear or have read so much about that type of acting. So in that respect, they had, I think, very different approaches to their roles and how they act.
They were still amicable. November 25th, 1864, they performed together at the Winter Garden, New York City, to raise money for that Shakespeare statue that's still there. You can go still see it, Mary. If you want to New York City and go see the statue that the Booth brothers put up. But I think there's a lot of stuff that they kind of came together. But at that point, I think the die was cast with a lot of things with John. I think all the issues that popped up throughout his life, the ball was rolling.
The politics were definitely coming into it at that point.
And as the war went on, it is said that he said actually that he did not join the Confederacy because of a promise he made to his mother. She would not give him her blessing to enlist. She would not give up this son. This was her favorite son. Mrs. Booth had buried 4 children, 3 in 1833. Oh, that must have been unbelievable. And 1, I believe, in 1836. These are all before John was born, of course, but she would not give up this son. She said no. But we do know from Asia that he was a smuggler, for quinine and things like that. But that was very interesting. I mean, I kind of go back and forth. He was so strong-minded and he was so intent. I could see him as a cavalryman, because remember, and he was an expert horseman. You could see him that way, but he didn't. And I still, and he says it's because he made a promise to his mother.
My opinion of it is that I think that's very much the case, that it was the promise he made to his mother, and he struggled with that. He struggled with it quite a bit. And so that explains the blockade running, the drug smuggling, all the other stuff in ways that he could somehow participate in this cause that he believes so strongly in the South. But because of how he felt about the women in his life that he was closest with, his mother and his sister, he was not about to wrong his mother in that way, knowing that she would not give her blessing. And I think he struggled with that. And I think that led to a lot of what is happening to him at the end of the Civil War, especially with the fall of Richmond. Just that one, there's that one speech that Asia has in the book where he's going on about, Lincoln and the South and all that. And just to see how passionate he was about that, I can't, it must have been hard for him. I don't think he was people have labeled him as a coward for not enlisting, but I think it was just that might have been his mother,
Well,
he can write to the line and back off.
Himself a coward, right? He called himself a coward. That's documented for not enlisting. He called himself a coward. Yet when you look at the whole big picture, further this, the pebble in the water, when you further this, how much worse of a cowardly act than to shoot a man, an unarmed man, in the back of the head. That just shows you, I think, how really, truly misguided. We thought Lincoln was a tyrant, but
I mean, you can see, he's in Richmond. He's feels like he's the son of the South, and he sees Abraham Lincoln in his mind, which is what a lot of the people in the South thought at the time, that he was becoming some sort of king, some sort of tyrant. And one thing, John Wilkes Booth was a really big fan of George Washington. He was like, no way can this guy take a third term when George Washington didn't. And Asia talks about in her diary. In his mind, he was being patriotic, defending the Constitution. This is way before I'm saying this is during 1864 when everything was kind of going. What's interesting about this, though, you mentioned before, he said he was making $20,000 a year, which is big money. It's like Mary money,
Like, I'd like to know, can anyone convert that in today's money? Mayor?
Oh, God.
Yeah, you don't want her, trust me.
$1 billion.
She'll say it's $7.28. But you know what, though?
Sorry, just
no, it's okay.
Wow, you caught right on. She figured you out pretty quick. But you know what, though? What I always thought was kind of funny, though, is this is a guy who was making big money. People would show up at Tudor Hall looking for Dr. Booth because they were trying to sneak quinine through the lines. He was somebody who was a smuggler, but still protected his mother. Isn't it funny how different he ended up being than John Surratt, who was also a smuggler who went against his mother?
Yeah.
Yep.
How it's a 180, how funny that is sometimes.
I mean, they wanted him. They took her instead. They wanted him. They took
because he's hiding up out. He's hiding in my country.
Yeah, thanks.
Speaking of Mary Surratt, though,
I
gotta represent right here. So, like my coffee mug.
His name, John Wilkes. He was named, we believe, by his paternal grandfather. That is, that Wilkes name, that John Wilkes. It was for the English radical and politician. And he said he grew up very proud of that name because it meant liberty. Like you said, this is from the time he was, very young.
I keep going back to the whole gypsy thing. And I know some people think that's kind of overrated, but he talks about it. He told Asia, he says, the gypsy said I was to have a grand life, no matter how short it was to be grand. Mm-hmm. So he kept going back to that. So for him, it was almost like a self-fulfilling prophecy he had, that he had a short term to whatever he thought was going to be what was going to make him famous, whatever was going to be acting, whatever was going to be. I think he always knew he had a short time. And I think he kind of played into it himself a little bit psychologically, but he still had Asia as his backbone. And it kept going back to her. That was his reality. Whenever he got drifted, she'd pull him back into reality.
At the time of his death, he had a gold medal on his neck and it was Agnus Dei, which is Latin for Lamb of God. Asia converted to Catholicism when she attended the Sisters of the Carmelite Convent in Baltimore, Maryland. She converted. It's to wonder, and I know, Darren, you and I kind of keep going back, who really could have given that to him? History gives us no clue. History doesn't tell us who gave him that. But I know that you have a very strong sense, if you believe it was her, it was Sister Asia, to protect him.
We were saying the other night, I think there's obviously no way to prove that, but
Right.
it just seems that there's no such thing as coincidences in life. There really aren't, He was someone who was not he was not a church going person. I mean, he's like Mary in that regard, isn't, burst into flames. She walked into the church, but I think what happened was, she became Catholic. And I think what happened was, I think that was his way of knowing that she was going to be with him. And I think he knew that from April 14th on, that was going to be the end of his life. Mm-hmm. And that was his lifeline to her, even though he knew he'd never see her again. Yeah. So in my opinion, because why else would he wear it? Where did he wear it? That's the whole thing that doesn't make any sense.
Yeah. Well, reason why. At the time of his death, he was secretly engaged to Lucy Hale, right? Abolitionist daughter from senator from New Hampshire.
The awful state of Connecticut, by the way.
New Hampshire.
He's from New Hampshire.
Oh, whatever it is, all the same. Connecticut.
I definitely do agree with the two of you that, it's one of these things in the historical record that we don't have the facts, but sometimes you have to read between the lines. And I think it makes the most sense that Asia would have given him something like that, and that he would have worn it because she's his rock. So that's the lifeline. And I mean, he knew by either very late on April 14th, 1865, or the early morning hours of 1865. That was it for him. He only had days, maybe weeks left to live. Lucy Hale, I don't know that she would have given him something like that and that he would have worn it. I think it's more coming from Asia.
Well, he had 5 photographs of, visiting cards of 5 ladies. One was Lucy. That's your one and only. What are you doing with all the other ones?
I know. Yeah.
You take that out of the mix, then this is a very personal thing on your neck. Right.
Yeah.
He was, saying he loved Lucy. And again, this is not for me to question or quantify or anything, because matters of the heart are matters of the heart. That's it. But you dig a little bit deeper, and, for something like that on his neck, why would he have had it? It's a Catholic medal. I mean, I don't know the denominations of the other ladies. And again, it could have been someone else, but I really like the way you guys think of that, because a lot of my lectures, I always say, mindful, it's never just words on a page. So when you look into that and you look at their relationship, I kind of like your thought process to get to that.
When you're in your toughest, worst situation, you always want to have some kind of anchor that'll help you, no matter what it be. Some people use religion, some people use alcohol, whatever it is, right? You notice they do. I mean, but you just want to have whatever it was the most important thing at that moment in the most important time. For him, it was that medal, right? Because he didn't give it away. He didn't try to do anything. He didn't try to trade it. He had it on him the whole way. So whatever that Lamb of God thing was, like we said before, he told her he was going to be a Christian and Catholic and all that. But I think at the end of the day, he wore that for her. And again, no one will ever know one way or the other, but it just seems like it would make sense.
Yeah, no, it does make sense. And it does, we're not wrong. We're not wrong in our opinion.
We're not wrong. We're not right. It's just, if you read between the lines, it kind of gravitates, to that, knowing their closeness. And something I want to share with you both tonight, speaking of Asia and John and, the Carmelite sisters, and I'd like to share this, with your audience. I was doing some research for another lecture I just did over the weekend. And I wanted to find the dates that Asia was actually at the Carmelite Convent in Baltimore. And again, it's just nice to have points of reference, right? As you're going on your timeline, right? And so I looked it up. The Sisters of Carmelite, they have a website, and I'm like, oh, this is cool. They have their archives. So I'm popping in Asia's name, try to find the dates. Can't find the dates, but I can read you from the archives of the Sisters of the Carmelite in Baltimore, Maryland, correspondence by Asia Booth Clark, 1865, 1875. And it goes from also, it says here, September 5th, 1868 to March 22nd, 1875. And I'm going to read you what was on the summary page of what I understand are 3 letters written by Asia Booth Clark while she was in England to a former teacher. And I'm going to read you a summary paragraph. Former student of Mother Teresa Sewell, Asia writes 3 letters about her life in both England and the continent. She compares religious environment of both. English are a cold, bigoted people and so intolerant of Catholics and so bitter about Catholics and rituals that France is a welcome change and like a different world where processions and devotions are frequent and sustaining of faith. Then she goes on to narrate a story of her daughter's exercise of the love of the poor, creating a doll lottery of their own toys. Now, I was looking at that and I really was like, oh, okay. I did take this information to a Booth historian and I was told this is an original discovery.
This is why history is so cool.
Unbelievable.
Because you find this stuff when you dig around, right? And
just, and I was like, just like that, I had no words. So someone likes to talk about this stuff, I had no words. So what I did was I contacted the archivist at the convent. I did put in a formal request respectfully for copies and or procedures and how to actually get a copy of this. And we don't know what it is. It looks like from that little bit of summary, it looks like she's talking about, well, we know she was very unhappy in England, right? You know that her marriage had soured and husband wasn't faithful. It's a whole bunch of unpleasant things. So she was corresponding with a former teacher. And we think about that in our own lives, as a teacher or a mentor who's always kind of guiding us on our path. And if we're feeling bad or we're in trouble, where do we go? Yeah, we have family and friends and whatever, but we have a tendency to go that direction too. So I was very excited to share that with you. Certainly, it's COVID, obviously, so we need to, understand there may not be an avenue right now to extract this information. So we need to be patient. And of course, I'm like, get me that now, but we can't do that.
I know. Yeah, I know what you mean. Yeah, when you have something like that, you want it.
Oh my God. Okay.
Right away.
It's 140 years. I guess I can wait another month or two,
Well, that's really awesome.
That's the amazing thing too, though. It's just what else is out there. The real shame of the whole thing was after the assassination, the government was taking anything that he had filled out, had signed, anything he'd done, and just destroyed it. And so there's so much history that is just gone.
Burned anything they had of him. Like, let's remember, it wasn't in your best interest to have anything of John Wilkes Booth in your possession at that time. With the government was just coming in and scooping up people and throwing them in jail, and the heck with you.
At least they're never going to get my bobblehead. I'll tell you that. Right.
I love that bobblehead.
They're not getting this. The reality is, though, is all kinds of history is just lost, and that's the shame of it. And you wonder how many of these little gaps that we're talking about, filling in these gaps between, like we mentioned, the whole thing with the Agnes Day necklace. How many things are just gone to history that could really tell a lot more stories about these people? Now, we mentioned after the assassination, all the hell the Booth family went through. Edmund would tell Asia, John is dead to us, consider him gone. You had all the issues over in England with Philippa Clark, with Asia, fighting the ghosts. There's that story where, their son was about 10 getting teased in England about Uncle John. And that's how he found out about the assassination the first time.
Couldn't deal with it. I mean, it's terrible. She couldn't do it.
I think she saw him crumbling before her eyes, like her brother, slowly starting to disintegrate into this darkness. I think she had always been able to pull him out of that before, if that ever happened. But this was one time when she couldn't.
Darren, it's like you said earlier, it's like he was born for this destiny. The messages of the gypsy, the message the mother saw in the flames with the word country when he was just 6 months old. All of these things were just propelling him towards this ignoble end. I kind of like the way you frame that. I'd like to get into just a little bit, if I may, a little bit of Asia's life after the assassination. I do have a few paragraphs here I'd like to share with you. What happened was, after Asia left the United States in 1868 with her husband John and her children, she wrote 3 books. One was in 1866, right after the assassination. It's called Booth Memorials, Passages, Incidents, and Anecdotes in the Life of Junius Brutus Booth. And in the second paragraph of the introduction, she says, "Calamity without precedent has fallen on our country. We of all families secure in domestic love and retirement are stricken desolate. The name we would have enwreathed in laurels is dishonored by a son, his well-beloved, his bright boy Absalom." Asia's talking about the reference from the Bible of King David's son, Absalom. It was his 3rd son, his favorite son. John Wilkes was the favorite son. He was also the 3rd Booth son. The story of Absalom is that not only was he the handsomest man in the kingdom, John Wilkes Booth was considered the handsomest man in America, right? probably a People cover magazine now. He, in fact, rose up against his own father, tried to steal his kingdom, whereupon he wasn't successful and he ended up destroying himself. Again, this was put in the second paragraph of the introduction. And I believe that she put it there on purpose, not to be missed, stating unequivocally the author's pain. It's in the introduction. You know how you open the book, we say, okay, it's like right there, even before she starts the book. She talks about now in the aftermath of the assassination, she said it was like the days of Bastille in France. People were being incarcerated. Someone sent up by her servant, this is when she was in Philadelphia, that the announcement that on hearing the news, Mrs. J.S. Clark went insane and she was in an asylum. She says, the tongue of every man and woman was free to revile and insult us. She says, every man's hand was against us. From the diary of John Wilkes Booth, an excerpt from one of the 12 days he was on the run, April 21st, 1865, he says, after being hunted like a dog through swamps, woods, and last night being chased by gunboats, till I was forced to return wet, cold, and starving, with every man's hand against me, I am here in despair. Asia, in her book, the Unlocked book, she goes on to talk about Edwin Booth, and she says that her husband Clark was going to dissolve the partnership with him. Remember I said earlier they were partners and managers? She said, well, this was a generous offer made when Edwin Booth had all the world against him. Let's just take a look at those three phrases. Interesting. Every man's hand was against us. This is Asia in her book in 1874. With every man's hand against me, John Wilkes Booth, April 1865, and all the world against him when she's talking about Edwin. That again is from 1874. It's interesting that John would use this phrase in his diary. And it's interesting too that in 1874, she would use two variations of the same phrase. Again, you know, when I give these lectures or these talks, it's never just words on a page. I wanted to look a little bit deeper because those phrases called to me as I was looking, they just kind of jumped out. I thought perhaps it came from Shakespeare, but it actually comes from the Bible. From the King James Bible, Genesis chapter 16, verse 12, it reads, and he will be a wild man, his hand will be against every man, and every man's hand against him. And he shall dwell in the presence of all his brethren. The King James Bible was authorized for use in the worship of the Episcopal Church. The Booths were raised Episcopalians. Perhaps it's a coincidence, Darren, we don't always believe in them. Mayor, you don't either, that both the brother and the sister would use a variation of this phrase in their writings. I have come to understand it was a commonly used expression. I didn't realize that till I got a little bit deeper, but I found it really incredible that it was used during times of great despair for both of them. Another common allele that this brother and sister share.
I wonder how many times they may have said that phrase because they obviously felt like they were alone.
I was just thinking
up,
that, like, how many
right?
letters don't we have from them where they wrote that to each other if they were corresponding that way, or they were sitting together on that, like they always seemed to sit on a porch swing.
Maybe he wrote that in his diary to let her know that he was somehow okay.
That was the other thing. Here's the question. It was written in 1865. She left the United States in 1868. Did she see his diary?
Yeah.
There you go.
That's those historical gaps we were talking about, those things that we'll never know. But it's fun to speculate, though. You know, Mary and I talk about the what if thing all the time with the history stuff, the war and the battles. And this is a good one, too, because you wonder just how much they're almost like twins in a way. They kind of thought a certain way, like you kind of picture them just thinking the way they did. So you wonder how much they would have really felt akin to each other, and you know how many things they did that we just don't know about, as far as just the mental stuff. And
they definitely have a very twin-like bond. I think they could, read each other very, very well.
It's interesting too that if you notice in the book, she ends her memoir of her brother John with a line from Shakespeare. She says, "So runs the world away. So runs the world away." It's from Hamlet. It's Act 3, Scene 2. The full line is, "For some must watch while some must sleep. So runs the world away." And it gave me pause as to try to decipher what Asia was trying to tell us about her brother John here. Of all the lines in Shakespeare's, all the plays he performed, she chooses to end her memoir, the secret memoir of her brother John, with this line. What is she trying to tell us mindful again, it is never just words on a page. This is how I read it. It's not so much that John Wilkes Booth, we know, performed in so many Shakespearean tragedies, right? And successfully, is that I believe Sister Asia is telling us here that in the end, not only did John create the greatest of all American tragedies, he in fact became an American tragedy himself.
So in the end, he lived his prophecy.
Yep, he did.
He did, right?
That's what I think that is saying here.
Yeah,
Yeah.
but
So
she's taking it from Hamlet, who had his own downfall.
Right.
His history will show Booth, and by no means is anybody here going to glorify what he did, but history shows Booth as the perpetrator of the worst crime in American history.
Correct.
And that's how history, and that's justifiably so.
Justifiably
right. But I think as you dive into someone like him, you find out that the number one fabric in his life was his fondness to protect the women in his family. And the two biggest anchors in his life, despite all the womanizing, was his sister and his mother. And everything he did growing up was for them and try to outlive this thing that he had, that this darkness that he was trying to live with.
She died in 1888 in England, and her last wish was to be buried in the Booth plot at Baltimore, Maryland, at Greenmount Cemetery. Now, John is buried there as well. He's buried with those three little children that died at Tudor Hall in 1833, and there's no marker for his grave. And the interesting thing is, if you've been to Greenmount, you will see that Asia's gravestone says Mrs. J.S. Clark, and there's an obelisk. Here's her grave. Then there's an obelisk that Edwin Booth had put in honor of his father, has all the Booth children's name on it. And exactly across from that is John. They are as close as they can be in death as maybe they were. I don't know. They're together now, in oblivion. When you go there, you can actually feel this palpable sadness. I mean, even it's a very beautiful cemetery. It's really old. Her friend Jean Anderson is buried near there. You see there are many Booth graves. The only ones who aren't buried there is brother Edwin, who's buried at Mount Auburn Cemetery in Cambridge, Massachusetts, with his wife Mary, and his older brother Junius, who I believe is buried, I want to say Manchester by
the Sea, New Hampshire,
Massachusetts. Okay.
Massachusetts, yeah.
Those two aren't, and even John's paternal grandfather, who we believe may have named him John Wilkes, is buried there. So you see all the family graves, mother, father, sister, Rosalie, that Joseph Booth eventually became a doctor, his second wife, Cora, their little boy. And then there's just big green patch, this empty mound. The statement is profound. It's an ignoble end for a terrible deed. So it was horrible. And even with all of this information that we have, we still go back to that point of reference. It was a hellacious American tragedy. So
for everybody involved, I think.
I mean, like I said, her life in England was terrible. Her husband, they became a little more estranged. He led a separate life. She was writing to her friend Jean Anderson, and she said, clearly not in jest, she only married John Sleeper Clark to her brother Edwin. Ooh.
Yeah.
Well, John knew that. That's why he said what he said to her.
What Edwin went through too, that they were painted with this brush for so long that the family is now tainted. And it's just but as Darren said, it's a fun study. It's something I've always enjoyed looking at Booth beyond just the assassination, to figure out who was he and what led him to those events.
The thing is that we don't have any more answers now, do we, after discussing this? That we because that's just one of those things, but it kind of begs that question to go back and say, I wonder what's in those letters. Oh, stay tuned, guys. Stay tuned.
Yeah, we're looking forward to that. That's why history is so good. Like when you find a discovery like that,
it just shows you it's there. Be interesting. Even if she mentioned her brother John, you'd be like, oh my God.
But enough to be able to try to fill in the dots a little bit, fill in the blanks, and try to guess, and just try to wonder, the dynamic. And like we said before, studying him is it's a true American tragedy for so many people. You go back to Henry Rathbone, Claire Harris, all the people that were affected, and you can make a case that more than a case that his actions on April 14th to this day affect this country. Yes. It certainly affected, the way the South, after the Civil War ended, Reconstruction certainly.
Yeah, because remember, Lincoln was like come back and everything was reconciled. And, he was so ready to move forward with that promise. And, well, he thought he was going to be a hero, obviously. And, wow, that was so misguided, and was shocked, I think, when he read those papers, brought by, was it Thomas Harbin brought him those papers?
The Pine Thicket.
You always wonder if he had one of those holy crap, what did I do moments at some point.
I think he had it at Dr. Mudd's. I think he had it at Dr.
You
Mudd's.
think he had it, Dr. Mudd's?
I think it was Dr.
When he
Mudd's.
wrote "With Every Man's Hand Against Me," I think that was a flag or a way. Maybe if his sister saw that, that was maybe a message to her. That's very good. I really, really like that.
Yeah, I think it started at Dr. Mudd's. I think he was,
Really?
getting ready in the morning and looking at himself in the mirror when he was shaving, and kind of like, I might have
felt like the only guy on the planet. He probably felt like at that very time, the only guy in the world.
Yeah.
And he maybe did some soul searching, like, whatever hateful buzz he was on, did he wake up and say, what did I do? What did I do?
I think that's where it started. And then, in the Pine Thicket, it came to even more as he's reading not what he expected to read. And it's hitting him more and more as the days pass.
But he was still trying to get away. Interesting.
He was, yep.
Well, the fight or flight.
You had to know. I mean, he's in that barn and theatrical to the end.
Yep. He's found by a Canadian.
Yeah.
I had to get that in. Edward Doherty is a Canadian. So.
One more stain on the old banner.
Leading the 16th New York.
All right, one for you guys.
Yeah.
Definitely. So, Lisa, you got some stuff going on. We'll talk about what you got going on here for you. Mary and I are signed up for your class we're going to be taking here pretty soon. So why don't you tell us a little about that, what you got going on?
That's going to be based, it's an adult enrichment class through the Farmington Valley Adult Education. This is going to be based on my poetry and essay book. It's called The Nameless and the Faceless of the Civil War. It's a collection of 28 poems and 20 essays on the Civil War. And what it is we're going to have a discussion of so many poems a night. And the premise of this book is that we know that not everyone who experienced the Civil War made it into the history books. And it was inspired by Michael Dougherty's book, Civil War Diary, when he was a prisoner of war. And he was from the 13th Pennsylvania Cavalry. And after I was reading so many of his entries about being in Belle Island and Richmond Prison, and then when he got to Andersonville, we all know that was a hellacious death camp. But it was only after I was reading, he was saying, 50 men died today, 100 men died today. And I'm like, well, who are they? And then that's when the thought came that what about all of the other unknowns, not just the unknown soldiers, but the unknown civilians and things like that. And it just kept after me and kept after me. And then the creation came that I'm giving a voice to the unknowns. I still can't give them a name or a face, but I can give them a voice to tell them of their story. So each poem will reference a Civil War event. We'll go over that through the rhyme and narrative of poetry. That's coming up in February. In April, I have a new book coming out, The Nameless and Faceless Women of the Civil War. It's the same premise, and portions of that book won me Artist in Residence through the National Parks Arts Foundation, National Park Service, Gettysburg for poetry for 2020 in September. Unfortunately, COVID didn't make that happen. So I'm hoping it was postponed, not canceled. I'm hoping to get back on the schedule for some time this year. Also, I just want to share that I've also lectured at the Civil War Roundtable Congress. I've had a lecture on John Wilkes Booth sold out, as well as placed #1 on YouTube for my lecture for all Civil War Roundtable Congress. That was very exciting. I've also lectured at Blenheim, the Civil War Interpretive Center, the Edgar Allan Poe Museum in Richmond, and, quite a few other things. I've written 2 fictional novels on John Wilkes Booth. My name is John Singer. My name is Mrs. John Singer. And the interesting thing about those 2 books, there might be a third coming trilogy, is that the reason that I wrote them was because in 2012, I read this book, and it was Asia's Words.
I do have that one.
Yep.
Me too.
It was Asia's words about her brother John that made me want to bring the brother and sister together. She would forgive him and he would be repentant. And I created that in both My Name is John Singer and My Name is Mrs. John Singer. So it was because of her that I wrote about that I came to him.
Very cool. Wow.
Yeah.
This was all very, very fascinating. Thank you so much for this. The one thing that we do need to do before we close off for tonight, though, is we usually do this at the beginning, but we're going to do it at the end. And it's what we were all drinking tonight. It's our little tradition on Civil War Breakfast Club.
Oh, you want me to tell you?
Yes.
Oh, okay.
Shot of
Iced tea. Like
nice.
I think it's fit and lean or something.
Nothing wrong with that.
That's me trying.
It's our tradition on here. So Darren, your turn.
Well, since we're talking about John Wilkes Booth, I'm drinking a beer called the Escape Plan, obviously, and I'm drinking it out of my Mary Surratt coffee mug. So gotta stay in theme.
Well,
Mary's.
mine was Life in the Clouds by Collective Arts Brewing, and I chose this one because they feature a different artist all the time on their cans.
Cool.
So this one had a full moon on it, which the moon is quite significant for this podcast because we love the 11th core, and the symbol for that is the crescent moon. But this is a full moon, and that was what John Wilkes Booth would have seen when he was escaping from Washington.
Yeah, that's right.
Yep, he said to the guard, I thought I would ride home by the light of the full moon. And I saw that beer in my fridge, and I was like, we're not going to talk about that part of it tonight, but I wanted to mention that. And then I'm drinking it out of my William Tecumseh Sherman mug because I don't have any mugs. Shockingly, I have a gigantic Civil War mug collection. I don't have any in reference to John Wilkes Booth or the assassination or anything like that. I chose William Tecumseh Sherman tonight because it was on this day in 1861 that Louisiana seceded, and Sherman was the superintendent at what would eventually become Louisiana State University.
Oh, that's so cool. Excellent.
And of course, I got my bobblehead.
Yeah, and we got our mascot for tonight too.
Do I get a parting gift? Do I?
Yeah.
Well, this one doesn't have a broken leg, so it's not legit. So this unfortunately,
make sure it's the left leg, right?
Yeah, exactly. Yeah,
firm and steady. So that's pre. But anyway, Lisa, yes, thank you so much for coming on. This was awesome. I hope you enjoyed it.
I did. I hope you guys did too. I hope your audience does. Hope we all come away learning. That's what it's all about.
No, that's what we want to do. We wanted to get away from the one thing we like to do in this podcast, and this kind of goes back to you telling the story of these unknowns with the poetry. We like to tell some of the lesser known stories on this podcast. So that's why we went into battles that are, like Stones River or the Mud March, that are kind of these footnotes in history. And we also try to tell the stories of the men that might not have the voice in history as well.
You're gonna love the class.
Yeah. Oh yeah. We're really looking forward to it. But yeah, and we just like to make them human and just tell a story so that people can learn something from it. And as we said at the beginning, John Wilkes Booth has been somebody that Darren and I have been studying from a lot of our lives, and not just the assassination.
I can tell.
But
your
just
base is excellent, both of you. Yes.
Oh, thank you. You are. We asked you
it.
to be on here because you are like to us. You were the one that we had to have on. You know your stuff. You were the expert in this. And
oh, goodness gracious, thank you.
Yeah, we definitely wanted to have you on.
It was my pleasure. I enjoyed you both. The forum is excellent. It's great to share ideas, feelings, and again, it's all about the learning.
Mm-hmm.
When we listen to each other, and that's how we learn. You can. Maybe not, what if, but it's all about the learning. So that was great. Thank you guys.
Oh,
I'll come back.
Oh, thank you. Yeah.
Let's have it back on. So
yeah. And no opinion on here is ever wrong at all. Like everybody we like to have it as a place that is kind of.
Unless it's my opinion, Mary, then it's always wrong.
She's still trying to get me to swear.
It's true though. No opinion's ever wrong as long as it's hers. That's okay. End of the story. Mm-hmm. I said it, but no. So coming attractions like we always do. So we're going in talking about secession next week, right?
Yep.
We'll be talking about that, and so we'll be moving on to this.
And then after that, we will have our Valentine's Day episode, which will be dating profiles of the generals.
Of the Civil War generals, which will be fun. A fun little little thing we'll do, and we'll be doing our another reminder. The book club is coming. We have the date of March 31st. We'll be doing the book club. We'll be talking about Eric Schleinlein Black Iron Mercy book. Mm-hmm. So everyone jump on as well. We've talked about that. Any final words from you, Mary?
This was awesome. Thank you so much, Lisa, for we've wanted to do this for a while, and it's great for us to finally nerd out over something like this and to talk about it and to give more of a story to this tragic event in American history, and hopefully get some people. The one thing I want to say is, if you can, get this book, get A Sister's Memoir by Asia Booth Clark and read it, because it's going to give you so much insight into who John Wilkes Booth was. It's going to give you a better understanding of the assassination. And if you're someone who studies Lincoln, I highly recommend reading it because it's going to help you understand him a little bit better too. The thing we always say here is read, question what you read, and read even more, and just gain as much knowledge as you can.
Yep. Read as many different books as you can. It's everyone's got a different spin
But
Talk about
this
Terry
is
Alford's book. We talked about Copland's book.
Oh,
There's
yeah.
so many books on the subject.
This is all there is on,
Yep.
on really on her. This is, this is what we have. So, it's incredible. And like you said, it's an excellent read. It's what drew me in 2012. It was a time when Civil War battles were coming close to 150. 2015, we had the 150th anniversary. And if you can imagine, I was actually at Ford's Theater for the 150th. I actually got a ticket.
That is so cool. I know a few people who were there for that.
Unbelievable. She drew me in. The fact that there may be letters that I might have inadvertently or I inadvertently just stumbled upon just makes it a closer issue for me, a closer sensibility for her and to her. I can't describe it other than that. She drew me in, and now maybe 140 years later, I may have found something or I did find something of hers.
Mhm.
You
Awesome.
guys are right. It's not coincidence. It's not.
No such thing.
Don't touch it. Thank you. You guys were.
And one of the book we got to enable Marys. We got to enable the nameless and faceless of the Civil War.
Yep.
By the great Lisa Samia.
Yeah,
That's to enable that book.
I've actually cheated a little and read some of the stuff in it before doing the course. So
definitely,
definitely ask if you like it, because I'll be like, oh my god.
Yeah, no, I love it actually. Yeah, definitely.
But check it out. Check
it's
it out.
It's on Amazon and Barnes and Noble, and it's everywhere.
And if you're Canadian like me, it is available at Indigo, which is our Canadian version of Barnes and Noble. They are selling it there. Amazon.ca was. When I couldn't
Lisa,
find
do you
there,
know
I was like,
do you know
oh.
Amazon? It has 5 stars rated on Amazon, not 4.8, 4.5.
Yep,
you got a perfect score.
I got
so good stuff.
Thank you guys, Rock. You are awesome.
But anyway, yeah, definitely check it out. Check it out. So Lisa's book is the New England Patriots of the book. So
yeah,
almost perfect, but close enough.
Yeah,
so maybe next year again.
So we are looking forward to your course and doing that. Thank you again for joining us tonight. Darren, do you have any parting thoughts?
Nope, just that was a great time to talk about this. It's a subject that sometimes people have a tough time talking about, but I think it's all about personifying and talking about these people as people, looking beyond the headlines and just trying to find out what makes people tick. And he's someone who certainly draws a lot of emotions out of people when you really go into it, just trying to find out, the genesis of the whole thing. And it's an interesting study. To your point, Lisa, it's a real American tragedy, and it's that's still being felt today. But like anything else, you can't hide from history. Darkest parts of history shine the most light on history, and so you have to really study this stuff to really appreciate it, to learn the whole thing. So hope everybody liked it. I know we did. So I know it's great to have Lisa on as well.
Yep. So Lisa, thank you again for joining us. So everybody, thank you for listening. And we will be doing our usual Facebook Live at 10 a.m. if y'all are listening to this. And as Darren said, we've got a few different episodes coming down the pike for you guys. So on behalf of Darren and our guest, Lisa, everybody have an awesome Saturday, and we will see y'all again soon. Bye.
On the other side. Peace out.
Bye.
Bye.